Today we have an amazing speaker with us coming from Australia. Our speaker is Chanel Contos. Good afternoon, Chanel. How are you today?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So, are you ready? Are you ready for our discussion today?
Yes, I'm very excited.
Yes. Thank you very much for speaking at this event, and we are very glad to have you here. So, maybe we can move on now to our fireside chat session. Chanel, you've spoken about how you first had this idea to send this form around to get anonymous testimonies regarding women and girls' sexual assault stories. Can you please share with us how did it go from being an Instagram poll to what it is today?
Yes, so out of a bit of a moment of anger, um, the idea for this was something I had had for a while. I had previously collected a few testimonies through approaching friends and things like that, but Um, in basically a moment of anger, I posted on Instagram asking, have you or has anyone close to you ever been sexually assaulted by someone who went to an all boys school in Sydney? So it's quite specific to the context that I kind of like grew up in, and there's lots of single sex schools in Sydney, so I was kind of trying to approach that area. But then I just got in testimonies from all over Australia, all over the world actually, but mainly Australia. And then um, the Instagram was too much to handle, so I opened a Google Doc, which is quite funny because anyone could have edited it. And then I was like, oh, we can't have that. So then I opened a Google form, and then I was taking it from the Google form to a Google Doc. It was a horrible process. And then we ended up launching the website teachersconsent.com, where people could directly submit their testimonies and we could click a button and they would be posted on there. Um, and then that's how the campaign went kind of national. We made the petition for early holistic consent education to be provided in schools, to be mandated in Australian schools. And after a year of lots of, you know, activism, lobbying, meeting with MPs, grassroots movements, all these different things, it happened. So the Australian government did mandate consent education in every school from kindergarten until year 10, every single year.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. It is amazing how you started that from just an Instagram poll into an organization that has so many impacts in your country. And I am really amazed by that. Maybe we can move on to the next question. Since the initial petition went out, if any, what improvement have you seen in schools or policy in general in terms of consent on sexual education in your country?
Oh my god, there's been so many improvements. So, also for context, Australia is kind of having a bit of a moment at the moment where there's lots of conversations about consent, sexual assault, child sexual abuse. Kind of, it's really broken through a bit of a stigma recently. There's been lots of reports of it in the media due to, kind of high profile cases, and then a few key activists really pushing for these conversations to be had. And so the biggest policy reform, and policy reform I'm most proud of, is the fact that we mandated consent education in the Australian national curriculum. So that's definitely a massive win, and that impacts all schools around Australia. Then, in terms of how schools are receiving this information, because the testimonies on teachersconsent.com named schools but not individuals, there were lots of schools who took it very seriously when they saw these testimonies. And I think it just kind of like put consent on the national agenda, or understanding that it was something that should be taught at school and taught to all Australians. That goes beyond schools as well, to parents. I think it made a lot of parents think, I need to have this conversation, even if I think it's awkward or whatever. I need to, educate myself on it so I can educate my kids. Um, and then we also had some really great resource allocation that's been happening around Australia. So the Australian government, as part of their election promise recently, they gave 77 million to consent education implementation, which is massive. Understanding that it's not just about the policy, but it's about how it's going to be implemented. There's been $5 million that's going to the Human Rights Commission for a survey that I'm the key advisor on, and we're going to start measuring if this is working and what needs to be improved in terms of the implementation. The federal government also very kindly just gave teachers consent $3.5 million to run a social media campaign to try get more consent education on the screens of young people in Australia. We've had legislation changes. There's an amazing woman in Australia called Grace Tame who advocates against child sexual abuse, and they've been running the Grace Tame Foundation has been running a harmony campaign to get consistent laws across the country that removes the word relationship from the offence of child sexual abuse and instead understands that it is the sustained, um, repeated abuse of a minor. And also, teachers' consent has been working really closely with with lawmakers around the country and our attorney generals to criminalize stealthing, which is the non-consensual removal of a condom. And we've had this criminalized since we've been running it in Queensland, South Australia, and Victoria's also done it, which means, oh, and the Northern Territory is about to do it, I think. So the reason for the stealthing campaign is because the work that Teachers Consent does is very much about normalized sexual assault, the type of sexual assault that occurs because consent is the issue of question. So I think stealthing is a perfect example of how sexual violence can be perpetrated very easily without a person being intentful or malicious in their acts. So we've had a lot of focus on that area and trying to prevent rather than we don't really do much in the kind of space of the aftermath or like recovery or anything. It's very much about the prevention that we focus on. But yeah, basically like heaps, which is really cool.
Thank you for your answer, Chanel. I agree that consent is a topic that's always been missing in the curriculum and conversation that we have, especially when it comes to sexual rights and sexual health and sexual and reproductive health and rights and justice. We actually have a prevalent issue here in Indonesia that is NCII. And it's amazing to see so many progresses have been made in a lot of different countries. Now, what advice do you have or can you offer for the young people, advocates, and activists who want to take action but don't know where to get started yet?
Oh, it's so hard because there are so many places to get started. Um, I would say if you don't know, just start doing things because something may take off, something may not take off. It may be right time, right place. It might not be. Like I said, I kind of started this a year before I actually went public with it in any way, and I didn't plan to do it on that day. I was just fed up and quite angry at the system, and decided to go forward on that day. I think the kind of best way to start is like definitely in your own community and understanding what's needed at a really grassroots level and then how you can involve people in that way. But then also, if you are someone who maybe you're doing a big research project or maybe you're studying at a uni or at school or whatever, kind of thinking about, okay, well, we know the problems, but what are the solutions? Because what I've learned over the last few years is that if you go to someone who makes decisions, whether that's a politician, whether that's a principal at a school, parents even, if you go to them with solutions to the problem, they do want to listen. Because the problem is relatively well understood. It just doesn't really want to be acknowledged by people because it's quite jarring and confronting. But if we say, okay, this is happening, but I think we should do this, in the same breath, always, and always have a solution alongside that, I think people are quite receptive to listening.
Thank you for all the tips and advices. It's definitely will be useful for all the young activists out there.
I also
Chanel,
actually one more thing that I always think about that I think is also why teachers consent kind of landed so well because the topic of sexual violence is a really tough one because it's very personal to a lot of people, especially women, in terms of people who had been victims or on the receiving end of this thing. But then also, I think lots of men feel very personally victimized by these conversations, and they quite often switch off about them and feel as though they can't approach it in any way. And I got told this quote, and I think about it all the time, and it's very much how I do all of my activism and all of the activism with teachers' consent. And the quote is, be ruthless with systems and be kind with people. And I think that's a really good way to approach activism as well. It's like always maintaining your kind of like ethics and morality and being nice to people, even the people who have done bad things, but looking at the systems that have created the world where these things happen at scale and being really critical of those systems and how those systems are affecting everyone in different ways. So yeah, just adding that.
Thank you. Thank you for the addition as well. Chanel, as we all know, sexual assault can greatly impact the mental health of the victim and survivor. How do you prioritize your mental health, and what advice do you have for other survivors out there?
I think that so interestingly, so I'm a survivor of sexual assault myself, but reading those testimonies, like reading thousands of testimonies of sexual assault in like a few weeks, was actually like way worse for my mental health than kind of like anything that had ever happened before. Again, because of this idea of kind of like normalized sexual violence and not addressing the things. And I had never even heard of vicarious trauma before I started this campaign. And for anyone that doesn't know what that is, it's basically when you take on the trauma of another person's experience, even though you didn't experience it, but you're hearing about it. So it feels like your body kind of thinks it's experiencing it. And to be honest, it was really hard. It took me a really long time to be able to navigate that field because I love my job so much, but also sometimes I get home and I'm like, oh, the world is bad and I don't know how to do anything about it. And it can be really draining on mental health, but I guess the tips are that as soon as it feels like it's too much, you really just need to fully stop. Like, unfortunately, the problem's not going anywhere. You know, you're still going to be needed tomorrow, in a week, a month, in a year. If you need to take that time off to just like take a step back and not think about these sort of topics for a while, that's completely valid. Um, I also think, and it goes kind of again to that systems, not people thing. The thing that I found best for my mental health and doing the work in this space is to focus on the structures and high level and, the power imbalances and the things that feed into this narrative rather than thinking about individual people and what that experience is for them. Sometimes I feel really bad about it because I feel as though I've almost had to like put up a wall that makes me feel less empathetic towards a lot of these things, but it's what you have to do because if we actually felt the empathy that every single person deserved in terms of sexual violence, it would be absolutely debilitating. So if you are going to do work in this field, you need to make sure that you're looking after yourself first and foremost. And I mean, it sounds so stupid, but whenever the day is bad for me, I just have like the longest hottest shower you can possibly imagine. And that seems to kind of do the trick.
I am very sorry for what you went through. If I may share a bit, I am also a survivor of sexual violence myself, and I am also currently volunteering as a case manager for sexual violence here in Indonesia. And I can actually relate by how extremely difficult it is to stay strong through our activism. And I also agree that as activists, what we need to do for our own mental health is to set boundaries. So, Chanel, you have started your own organization, Teach Us Consent, that focuses on lobbying for and providing holistic consent and sexuality education. Many grow up leaders are looking to make an impact in a similar way. Can you share some advice or maybe one thing you wish you knew before you started your own organization?
Yeah. And also, firstly, thank you for sharing that with me and with everyone. It's also so tough in this field because pretty much everyone who works in this field works in it because they're passionate about it because they've often had experience with it. So it becomes very nice because I think there's lots of mutual understanding between everyone in the field. But then also difficult because it's like, why do we have to be the ones doing this? Why aren't the men doing this work? Why aren't they the ones reading these testimonies? I'm sorry. Um, But yeah, tips. I have a few tips, definitely. My number one tip is kind of before you start in terms of, posting something on socials or going to the media or making it like a public thing in any way, is to get together kind of like a group of people, like a expert panel or an advisory group or something like that, and have them, be willing to, pick up the phone to you anytime to say, how do I do this? Can you connect me to this person? What do you think about this? Can you share this on your socials? And just kind of like a pre-existing group of people who are there, who know what you want to do, who can advise you and support you on that mission. I found that really helpful, and because I was so young when this all started, and I had so many amazing, friends and also just strangers volunteer that were also young, and it was very much a grassroots movement. But we had that expert advisory group of kind of like legit older, like, very successful people that could give us that more concrete support and, be like, no, that's illegal, that's not illegal, don't do this, do that, whatever. It's really helpful. I would also say, um, again, as we just spoke about, the boundaries, making sure you're taking time for yourself throughout this process, and kind of like the quicker and earlier you set up those boundaries, the better that's going to be for you, and also your activism. Um, and then another thing that I really didn't realize until I started the campaign and I started doing it, but like, important people want to meet with you and will meet with you if you ask them. So just having the confidence, whether it's the, head of your school, just being like, can I have a meeting with you? The head of your old school, can I have a meeting with you? Local MP, like whoever you vote for in your electorate or whoever is in charge of like governing your local thing, I think they have to meet with you, like, and they want to anyway. And so just like going out there and approaching these people again with that solution and saying, can I please speak to you? And then also every single person you meet, ask them for an intro to one or two other people, so that after every meeting you have, that you then have a connection, that, the local MP or the head of the school has said, hey, I really want you to speak to this person today, and continuing the conversation off. And then it just kind of like becomes an ongoing effect of who you're getting connected to and what can happen in terms of the reach of your activism. um, and then the last thing is, I think having like a really clear policy or ask or change is what is really effective. Because when we're thinking about sexual violence, unfortunately, I mean, apparently it's one third of women in the world have experienced it. I think it's way more, but I don't know. We'll never know. And, um, we can't simplify sexual violence to any sort of specific experience, because like far too many people, literally billions of people, have their own experiences of it in their own way. So I think what worked really well with teachers consent is I very much like focused on the context that I was in, which was Australia, and, the kind of like school system there that I felt like I really understood. And again, this form of like normalized sexual violence that, I was victim to, the idea of like peer on peer sexual assault. But I think being kind of specific, because it is a mammoth issue, so being as kind of specific and thinking of like a policy change or a ask or a amount of money to do a certain thing that will result, in a tangible outcome is really powerful. Because of course awareness is so insanely important, but I feel like people get fatigued hearing about all these stats around sexual violence, because I mean, obviously, I think they're really important. We should talk about them a lot, but I understand why people switch off to them. So again, having that solution to come alongside it, I think, would be a big tip.
Thank you, Chanel. Well, what an insightful and fruitful discussion we had today. It's such a pleasure for us to have you sharing your knowledge and experiences on today's topic. Everyone who have come to the end of our session, I would like to give an appreciation to Chanel as our amazing speaker, as well as to our committee. I'm Angeline Eugenia signing off. Thank you and see you in the upcoming Grow Up Global Leadership Summit next year. I am passing the mic to the MCs now.